we see a world where communities are meaningfully involved in service to the world.
Okay. Phew. So the theme for September is service, and today we are talking about service to the world. And I have some key ideas for us to think about when we think about service to the world, but they're really ideas that we can think about for life in general. The first one is this: what you put into life is related to what you get out of life, and that applies to service too. I've been thinking about an acquaintance of mine who is very passionate about a certain cause that is very dear to her. The thing is that every time she talks to me about this cause, I feel like I've just been beaten up, you know, or shamed for not understanding or not caring about the cause as deeply as she does. Not loving it like she does. So I've started to avoid the subject with her because I noticed that the energy that she puts into the communication about it seems to be doing more harm to the cause than good. Have you noticed that people care about different things? Which brings me to the second point. Try to be unattached to the outcome. In other words, for me, Edward, find the balance between caring about something passionately and holding it very lightly when other people don't care about it so much. Because that's the way of things. Not everybody's going to care about the things that you care about, or I care about, in the way that we care about it. Because you know the things we care about, that's life calling us. And it calls us in individual, unique ways. I was talking to somebody about a cause that is dear to my heart. The AIDS life cycle, which is a 545-mile cycle ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles to raise many millions of dollars for AIDS and HIV-related services. And as I was telling this person about this great cause to me, I could see she was becoming irritated. And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, "I am so sick of hearing about gays and their issues." And she said, "Because they are one of the most overrepresented groups in our society. Now, if you want to help an oppressed group, try doing something for women." And I have to admit, it's not often that I'm speechless. And I have to admit that my feelings were hurt. You know, and I think I also got a little insight into how my other friend might feel, right? When I don't seem to be on the same page with how she feels about this issue that's so important to her. And I got to thinking about that quote of Ernest Holmes: "Show me someone who is for something and against nothing." Which brings me to the third point. Try, Edward, to pay attention to what is seeking to express through you. Because surely there are enough causes to go around. There are enough things to be concerned about for all of us to be engaged in a way that matches us. And life is calling each one of us to the thing we care about. It's just, are we listening? And really to expect everyone to respond in the same way as I do is just a painful way to live. It's crazy. I have to pay attention to what has heart and meaning for me, and then support that in the most beautiful way that I can, and hold it pretty lightly if you're not moved in the same way that I am. I like to say that it's my duty, spiritually speaking, to discover what life is seeking to express through me and then be loyal to that. Because, what I'm loyal to affects the way I show up, whether it's in service or whether it's in my family, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's amongst my friends. Because if I'm loyal to winning or loyal to control, that's going to yield a different effect than if I'm loyal to generosity and compassion and empathy. It's just another way of saying one of the central ideas in our teaching in the form of a question: what is in your consciousness? Because it matters. And spiritual practices help me stay loyal to what is seeking to express through me. And by spiritual practices, I mean taking time daily to sit down and think about my relationship to what we heard in the song, that one, whatever it is. We call that meditation. And taking time daily to sit down and fill my mind up with ideas and thoughts and descriptions of my relationship to that one, whatever it is, affirmatively, and we call that prayer. That keeps me on track. I read something in Andrew Harvey's The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism. This is the recommended book to support this month's focus on service. And in it, he writes, "Sacred activists cannot begin to live from the depths of divine consciousness, and they cannot begin to act from the depth of divine wisdom and compassion without first making the commitment to a daily spiritual discipline. Marion Woodman," he writes, "once said to me, 'Continuing to do pioneering sacred work in a world as crazy and painful as ours, without constantly grounding yourself in sacred practice, would be like running into a forest fire dressed only in a paper tutu.'" I get it. The practice links me to that life that is seeking to express through me, and I have to stay with it. Now, back to this first point. What I put into life has got something to do with what I get out of life. And it makes me think of the question, what am I putting into life? Because, sometimes I can be focused on what am I getting out of life. Sometimes I can be overly focused on that. What am I putting into life? Several years ago, I called someone who used to attend the center because I had helped her family deal with the death of a family member. And I was calling to check in how she was doing. And she was kind of surprised to hear from me. And she said, "Oh, I'm fine. Edward, church is for people who are in trouble. And I'm doing all right now, so I'm not coming and I'm hanging out with a different group of people." And I went, "Oh." Now look, I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to serve the family, because that's a fulfillment of my mission as a minister, and I get to check my expectations, right? Hold it lightly, right? Whew. And if I really look into it, I go, you know what, actually, I ought not to be shocked. I've heard this before. I have. I've heard it before. I get to hold it lightly. And then I thought to myself, that person may not be aware of how much we can benefit from her healed up presence. She may not be aware that showing up in community during the good times and the bad times is a way of serving the well-being of the whole community. That her journey of healing may be the inspiration to others who have not made the journey yet. And the point is that your presence is the valuable contribution. It is an act of service to your family and to your community, especially when you show up for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, both in times when you're not doing so well and in times you're doing just great, during times when you're inspired by a cause that you're carrying, and times when nobody seems to care about it. Not only because of what you can get out of it, but because of what you bring to it. It's a system of mutuality. I have to tell on myself a little bit. I have to acknowledge that the first time I went to a center for spiritual living, my attitude was all, what's in it for me? And I never thought about what was I bringing to the group. How was I contributing to the community? And I have to admit that I was a little harsh on the minister. I had expectations. I expected her to be interesting every time. Because if she wasn't, in my own mind, I would threaten to leave. To go where the grass is greener. Isn't karma wonderful? I mean, it's embarrassing to admit that I didn't really care if she was tired. I didn't, because I was there for my spiritual aerobics. And to me, she was only as good as her last sermon. And if I liked what she said on a particular Sunday, I'd put a little bit in the offering, like a tip. And if she didn't inspire me, she didn't get the tip. Oh, you see, it is embarrassing, but I hadn't made the journey. I hadn't made the shift from me to we. And I hadn't yet made the shift to see that my presence was a way of contributing, and that in fact I might be providing the support for her greatness to come out. I never saw that. I was focused only on what I could get out of it. Do you know how much I value your presence here? Without you, there's no center. I learn from you, and I grow with you. You inspire me when I'm down, and you remind me when I lose track of what is trying to express through me. We do that for each other. I mean, I could talk to myself, and I do. But without you, there's nothing. A long time ago, maybe even 16 years ago, we hired a church growth consultant. And the consultant told us back then what the reasons people quoted were for why they picked and stayed in a spiritual community. I've never forgotten them. In order. The welcome, number one. Starting with the greeting they got in the parking lot. Number two, the music. You see, you can be predicted. Because it opens our heart, doesn't it? Number three, the youth program. What's there for our children? Is there something here for my children? We haven't even got to the message yet. Well, it's number four, the message. Oh, I like the minister very, very much. And number five, the facilities, particularly the women's bathrooms. Are they brightly lit and clean? Number six, the impact. It changed my life. And I thought about all of this, and I thought, you know what? It's fine. It's all fine and good, but, it's really nothing. That's just getting your money's worth. I mean, none of this matters without you. None of it. And I thought, you know what? What if you and I get out of life only a small portion of what is available, and we'll never get the rest until we make the shift to where we see ourselves as an essential part of the whole production? We get that our presence and what is in our consciousness is service. And by the way, I've heard a rumor that we don't necessarily have the best manners out there in the parking lot. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that it can be mayhem out there. I've heard that we become super spiritual once we've walked in the doors. Whether it's true or not, it got me to thinking, what if spirituality is not what happens only in the sanctuary, in the meditation, in the prayer? What if spirituality and service is what happens between people in parking lots? What if spirituality is what happens in you when you see somebody suffering? What if spirituality and service is what happens when you help bring in the neighbor's trash even though you're pressed for time, or when you go to an acquaintance's sister's memorial even though you didn't know her very well? What if service is how you pay attention to what seeks expression through you and you yield to that? Now, the classic book on service, How Can I Help, by Ram Dass and Paul Gorman, has this beautiful story. In the early stages of my father's cancer, I found it very difficult to know how best to help. I lived 1,000 miles away and would come for visits. It was hard seeing him go downhill. Harder still feeling so clumsy, not sure what to do, not sure what to say. Toward the end, I was called to come suddenly. He had been slipping. I went straight from the airport to the hospital, then directly to the room he was listed in. When I entered, I saw that I had made a mistake. There was a very, very old man there, pale and hairless, thin and breathing with great gasps, fast asleep, seemingly near death. So I turned to find my dad's room, then I froze. I suddenly realized, my God, that's him. I hadn't recognized my own father. It was the single most shocking moment of my life. Thank God he was asleep. All I could do was sit next to him and try to get past this image before me, before he woke up and saw my shock. I had to look through him and find something besides this astonishing appearance of a father I could barely recognize physically. By the time he awoke, I'd gotten part of the way, but we were still uncomfortable with one another. There was still this sense of distance. We both could feel it. It was very painful. We were both self-conscious. Infrequent eye contact. Several days later, I came into his room and found him asleep again and again. Such a hard sight. So I sat and looked some more, and suddenly this thought came to me, words of Mother Teresa describing the lepers she cared for as Christ in all his distressing disguises. I never had any real relation to Christ at all, and I can't say that I did at that moment, but what came through me was a feeling for my father's identity as like a child of God. That was who he really was, behind the distressing disguise. And it was my real identity too. I felt a great bond with him, which wasn't anything like I'd felt before. At that point, he woke up and looked at me and said, "Hi." And I looked at him and said, "Hi." For the remaining months of his life, we were totally at peace and comfortable together. No more self-consciousness. No unfinished business. I usually seemed to know just what was needed. I could feed him, shave him, bathe him, hold him up to fix the pillow. All of these very intimate things that had been so hard for me earlier. In a way, this was my father's final gift to me. The chance to see him as something more than my father. The chance to see the common identity of spirit we both shared. The chance to see just how much that makes possible in the way of love and comfort. And I feel I can call upon it now with anyone else. Service to the world can be thought of as doing something to improve the conditions of the world. And today, I'm trying to expand it for myself to also include in that definition the way I show up, that what's in my consciousness matters. How connected do I remain to the life in me so that it can help me see service as a way of serving life in its many costumes and disguises, as causes, as people in distress, as family. I'm going to Bali in January 2017 on a spiritual pilgrimage with people from the center. And I was remembering one of the first times I visited Bali. I was walking down the sidewalk in Ubud. Now, the sidewalks in Ubud are a bit dangerous because they are concrete slabs placed over open waterways, and sometimes they break. And I was walking along this busy sidewalk, and just ahead of me was a man in a primitive wheelchair, and he got to the break in the sidewalk. And I looked and wondered what would happen. And as if by some secret message from all around, people just converged on him and picked him up and carried him over the hole in the sidewalk. And I knew that the sidewalk ended in a very steep step, so I decided I would follow him to see what happened. And so I did. I followed him, and when he got to the end of the sidewalk, he just paused and looked around, and as if from everywhere, people came and picked him up and put him down. I've never forgotten that. It's reminded me that service is the inclination to help those who cannot easily accomplish what you can, instead of just watching. That AIDS life cycle ride I mentioned earlier. One of the hills that we climb up is called Quadbusters, for obvious reasons. It's very steep. And not all cyclists make it up all the way the first time, which can be discouraging and heartbreaking because they're so passionate about the cause they're serving. But some cyclists can, who are stronger. And I noticed that some of them cycle all the way to the top and then turn around and come back all the way down and cycle up again next to somebody who's struggling with their hand gently on their back to assist them so that they can make it to the top. It occurred to me, service is the inclination to come back down when you've reached the top, so that you can give others who are struggling and have not yet achieved it the assistance they may desire. I invite you to breathe in with me and to exhale for a moment of contemplation as we each in our own way think about that life in our own terms that may be seeking to express itself through us. And we can deepen our contemplation by asking the question of ourselves, and what is the nature of that life within that is seeking to express itself through me. And we can deepen the contemplation by asking the question, is there anything that I need to let go of so that life can more easily express itself through me? And we can deepen the contemplation by asking, is there anything for me to know and do and or be so that life may express itself through me? And bringing the contemplation to a close, we breathe in together, followed by a sigh.